Right, I think we're up and running. All good. Hi everyone, Lee Ashby here for Motocross Memories Worldwide. I've got another fantastic interview for you this evening. None other than MX legend himself, Mr. Jeff Leisk. How you doing, Jeff?
I'm doing great, thanks, Lee. Yeah, like everybody in the world, I guess we're dealing with some unusual times,
Yeah, very.
but we're pretty lucky down here in Australia. So we've got plenty of space to get out and about and stay out of trouble.
It's awesome to get to speak to you, meet you. In the group, my Facebook group, everyone's been excited about this interview and everyone's been interacting with it quite a bit. So they'll all be looking forward to this one.
I'm looking forward to it too. Always a pleasure.
Brilliant. Right, okay, then I'll get the questions underway for you. How did you get into motocross, and what is your earliest memory of the sport, and what bike did you first have?
Yeah, my father was a speedway rider actually,
Oh,
and so yeah, that sort of background ran pretty deep in the family. He was a rider at the famed Claremont Speedway in Western Australia. So my background's probably a little bit more speedway actually.
yeah.
And then the later part of my dad's riding career, he switched over to motocross, and I guess at the age of sort of young age of probably 5, 6, 7, I was attending motocross races, following my dad, and I guess that's where the interest in motocross came from.
Mhm.
And yeah, my first bike was actually a Yamaha 60, which seems a bit odd. Not a lot of people seem to know that one, but Yamaha 60. Then I progressed pretty quickly to an XR 75. And basically, when I sort of got involved in mini cycle riding with my older brother Mark, he's 2 years older than me. That's basically when sort of organised junior motocross or mini cycle racing was starting up in Australia. And I remember attending the first Australian junior motocross championship in Victoria in 1974. So we were sort of at the forefront of really the beginning of junior or mini cycle racing in Australia.
Did you ever go at Speedway yourself, or?
I actually did. I competed in junior speedway for a
Okay.
couple of seasons at the age of around 14 at the Claremont Speedway and some other tracks around. So I had a Jawa frame with an RM125 engine in it, and yeah, so I was actually at a point where I was thinking, oh, do I pursue the speedway thing, or do I go motocross? And I guess at sort of age of 14, 15, I chose motocross. I guess at that time too, the Supercross thing was happening in the US, and that seemed pretty exciting and was quite an attraction. And I guess the one benefit that motocross has always had over speedway is that it's manufacturer supported, where
Yeah.
speedway largely is not. And I guess that was also probably a part that drew me in that direction.
It's really interesting as well because my family background is in Speedway as well. My dad and uncle both race professional Speedway in England. And basically, I've been doing a lot of Speedway interviews lately as well because it's sort of obviously a lot in my background. So I've been doing a lot of Australian guys, Lee Adams, and a few guys like that. I'm speaking to Jason Crump soon as well. So yeah, it's been really cool.
Yeah, no, I noticed there's a bit of speedway flavour there, and
Yeah,
yeah. So look, at the end of the day, I guess if you're into dirt, whether it's
yeah,
speedway or
sure,
motocross,
yeah,
doesn't really matter. So
yeah.
yeah,
We all love it all. That's it. That's it.
we do.
Okay. Next one I got for you. What riders did you look up to and idolize when you were young, and why? And did you ever get to race any of your heroes?
Yeah, Bob Hanna was somebody. Marty Smith. Um, Gosh, I mean, obviously, Roger De Costa. There were some of the riders that you looked up to, and there was a lot more. I think riders like Heike Mikkola, and there was just so many really that I looked up to, and I did in fact get to race against Hanna. I remember getting T-boned by him one day at a race in California. So I was lucky enough to get T-boned by somebody that
Was that a bit surreal?
yeah, obviously I was going too slow because
Yeah.
I was in his way.
Yeah.
Yeah, so no, I mean, obviously back then it was different, wasn't it? You know, Perth. I'm from Perth, and Perth's one of the most remote cities in the world, actually, and just a long way from anywhere. And getting the information. I mean, you were sort of hanging out for a motocross action that arrive at your news agency.
Yeah, yeah.
I don't know how many months later from all the information,
Yeah.
and really, there wasn't really a lot of ways to kind of get the information about what was going on, but you just when you got it, I mean, it was gold. And you looked at these pictures and you looked at the supercrosses in America, or you saw what was happening in Europe. And then from time to time, some of these riders would come out to Australia. Guys like, I remember Gaston Rayeur came down to Australia and raced. Neil Hudson came down, raced. There was something. And whenever someone from Europe or America came to Australia, it was just so exciting for young people to see these riders. And I think, if you sort of go back into the earliest mid-70s or earlier 70s and into the 80s, there really was quite a big kind of disparity between the level of riding in Australia and what was happening overseas. That's not the case anymore, as we well know. There's lots of great riders that have come from Australia in recent years, but back then there really was a big difference. So when you got to see these riders, it was pretty mind-blowing.
Sure. Next one I've got for you. Who would you say were your closest rivals over your career in motocross, and who did you enjoy racing with the most, and why?
In Australia, guys like Stephen Gall, Anthony Gunter, they were some of the bigger rivals that we had. And then from time to time, we'd have some of the US riders come down and spend a season racing what was called the Mr. Motocross Series, which really, back in the sort of 80s, was the biggest racing series in Australia. And guys like Marty Motes, Jimmy Ellis, would come down and race us, and that was pretty good. Their experience coming in to race against the Aussies was really good, really cool. They had something to bring to the table, their experience, their know-how, and so it made it pretty interesting. But they were Australian rivals, and I guess going to the USA, guys like Ricky Johnson, Jeff Ward, Johnny Amaro, David Bailey, and then obviously Europe, guys like Thorpe and Eric Cabors, all just great competitors and people that you obviously respect a great deal.
Yeah, for sure, great memories. What was your favourite race bike during your career, and why?
Yeah, I think there's always, as a rider, I think there's always bikes that you tend to gel with more than others. And I think the Hondas, I spent a lot of time, when I was in the US in 80s, basically from 86 through to 88, I did spend a lot of time not only racing Hondas for two of the 3 seasons, but also I was doing a lot of the development testing, durability testing, and I got really, really familiar with the bikes, just spending so much time on them. And, I think some of the Hondas, anywhere in that era, I felt were pretty good, sort of, 86 or 88, they were good bikes. And I think it was might have been a 250 in 88. I quite liked the CR250 88 model. It just seemed to fit me pretty well.
Did you enjoy that side of things, doing the testing and that sort of thing?
I enjoyed it a lot. That was always interesting to work with the engineers, to work with the mechanics, and try and find ways to make the bikes better. That was always interesting. Not only better, but I think I also enjoyed the durability testing, and I really got a lot of insights out of that as to what goes into manufacturing a bike and what goes behind it. So it's not only performance, but it's reliability and durability and things like that are also really, really important. So yeah, I really, really dug that and got into it. And I was pretty fortunate in the early years in Australia, even I was involved with Honda, doing a lot of the pre-production testing on the 84, 85 model bikes, particularly when they took the CR 500s, took it to a water-cooled concept, and I was involved in that. I was also with Yamaha testing the aluminium frame 500. I've tested automatic CR 250s in Japan, so I've done a lot of pretty different and cool stuff. So yeah.
Oh, very cool, very cool. Did you have any favorite race numbers, and did that change throughout the years? And was there any particular reason for having that when you first liked particular numbers?
Actually, not really. That's one thing that's kind of strange. I probably came up in an era where the favourite number was probably number one because she'd won the championship, and that's how it was back in the day. So, yeah, I never really endeared myself to a particular number, to be honest.
Okay, cool. No worries. What track or venue did you least enjoy racing at?
Oh, I guess you try and put that out of your mind, don't you? So, there was some tracks actually that just, one or two tracks that probably you just could never really get your head around. I'm just really trying to think of which ones they were.
Was there any in Europe or America you didn't really enjoy?
Gosh. Even going back in Australia, funnily enough, I think most of the Australian tracks I kind of got dialed. There was a couple of tracks took me a long time to figure out. Being from the West Coast in Australia, we had a lot of sand, and in fact, if you're from Western Australia, they call you a sand groper.
Okay.
So yeah, because the coastal regions are just basically like beach sand, and so growing up I did lots of riding in deep sand, and that's why coming to Europe riding on the sand tracks was never really a problem for me. In fact, it was the other way around. I think some of the tracks that were sort of hard to pack, not funnily enough, really hard packed tracks, I kind of had a pretty good grasp of, because as strange as it seems, it's the techniques a little bit similar to sand, where you have to have a really smooth flowing technique, and you can apply that to a really hard, slippery surface. I think it's the tracks that are a little bit more ruddy and things like that I struggle with, and also tracks with really steep hills. Again, Western Australia, where I'm from, is just flat as a pancake, like a desert. So when I moved to the East Coast, any track that had hills on it, I really struggled on for quite a while. I had to kind of figure out how to ride those off cambers and ruts and stuff. So, yeah, probably hard to just pick one track out, but certainly from a style of track, the one that took me a lot longer to get my head around was anything that had really deep ruts or had steep hills.
Okay, cool. Was there any favourite racing gear that you wore over the year? Were there any particular kits that you liked wearing over the years set up?
Well, in Australia we actually had we had our own gear for a while there. It was Australian made, called Rat Clothing, Go the Rat. And although it probably wasn't the most technical clothing, it was kind of cool. It was an Aussie brand and had these rats all over it. And so in some ways, when you look back on it, it was kind of cool that we had a homegrown sort of brand of clothing. So if I could probably, say, that was cool. I like that. And obviously the Opico gear was pretty cool. I like that. It was, kind of unique and a little bit different. So that was pretty cool as well.
Very nice stuff. Did you have any superstitions in your career, or was there anything specific you had to do on race days, anything like
that? There's always a few. I think racing's a pretty intense and heavy sport, and particularly, I don't know if there's too many sports like motocross or supercross when you line up on the start line and have such a level of intensity and sort of some degree of uncertainty when you take off from the start line. So, but I think I'd always say a little prayer, to be honest, when I was on the start line. I'd always pray for the safety of other riders and obviously yourself. So it's pretty weird, but I'd always do that. So it was always a little bit of a superstition that I had.
Okay, that was a nice one.
Also against the number 13. I'm definitely, that's a number that I don't like and very superstitious about. I remember when Ricky Johnson kind of ended his career, he was riding with number 13, and I just look back on that and that's one that I'm not fond of.
Freaked you out a bit, that one. Okay, next one I got. Where did you race as a youth rider, and did you travel much as a youngster? And can you sort of elaborate on that youth and how that worked and going into the sort of pro ranks and stuff like that?
Sure. Well, as I said, I was from Perth and that's pretty remote, and even from the east coast of Australia, where 80-90% of the population resides. So I guess if I was going to kind of improve and I guess everyone knows that you tend to only get as good as the people around you, and so at a very young age, and I think like I mentioned back in '74, my brother and I travelled across to Melbourne for the first Australian Junior Motocross Championship, and that was sort of the start of it, and I remember many times my father with some other riders from Perth would get in a van and they'd drive nearly 4,000 kilometres, each way to a race in either Melbourne or Sydney for a weekend and then drive home. So, round trip sort of coming up towards, 8,000 kilometres. We did that a lot, and I look back and I can't even get my head around it, to be honest, what our parents did for us and how they backed us and their enthusiasm. I mean, obviously I always say that the parent needs to be more enthusiastic than the rider or the kid,
Sure.
because it just won't happen otherwise. And so that was the start of it. And then, I was pretty fortunate. It was strangely through a Speedway connection. When the English Speedway team was racing in Australia, we met a guy from England who was Michael Lee's mechanic, and this particular person is a good friend of mine today. And he knew Danny Laporte in the US, and we got talking about it. And I think at the age of 14, I travelled to the US with him. Just with him at 14, it seems pretty crazy without my family. And turned out we were in California, Southern California, and I wasn't really supposed to race, but it turned out that I did, and that was sort of the start of racing in the US at the age of 14, and I managed to get back across there many times thereafter, and so yeah, I was probably really one of the first people to race in the US from Australia. I know there was a guy called Laurie Alderton, raced a Trans AMA, but outside of Laurie, I don't think lots of people really raced motocross in the US up until that point in time.
Did you enjoy your experiences in America?
Oh, absolutely, yeah. I mean, I was just blessed and fortunate that my family had the means to give me those opportunities, and I certainly wouldn't be where I am today without those opportunities. So it was amazing, racing places like Saddleback Park. In 1979 was really the heyday of racing there, the numbers of riders. Racing was so accessible back then, and there was just a huge number of riders, and Saddleback was right in that sort of Orange County, Southern California hotspot.
Yeah.
And so to experience places like that, and I think in Southern California back then you could race 4 or 5 times a week. I mean, there was night racing tracks, it was going on everywhere, and so it was an amazing mecca of racing back then, just like nothing we'd seen coming from Perth.
Yeah, for sure. That was great experiences. Did you have any specific injuries during your career that you feel held you back from achieving even more in your career? And if so, what were they?
Yeah, look, motocross donations at Geldorf, I think it was 1985. I crashed in the practice, and I was had pretty good form, and I fractured some vertebrae in my back and spent 2 weeks in hospital there. So that was a little bit of a blow, but I came out of that pretty well, and I managed to sign a contract to race in the US the next year. So as sort of a support rider. So, but that was probably not opportune. And then in that first season in the US, again, I was performing pretty well for my first season. I think I ran 10th in the first race at Anaheim in the 250 class, and went down to San Diego the next week for the next race. And the start of the main event, Billy Lyles miscued a jump and landed right on top of me and broke my jaw. So that wasn't, those probably 2 incidents are the ones that probably really got in the way of my progress. But look, it's racing, everyone deals with it, and I guess it's not really getting hurt, it's how you come back from it that counts. So.
Okay, next one I got for you was: is there any other sports you like watching or even doing?
Yeah, there is. The only other sport really, which is kind of speedway related, that I like watching and I've participated in and been involved at a few levels, is sprint car racing, which is probably not as familiar to people in Europe, but it's something that's pretty big down here in Australia, and it's run at the different speedways, not so much where the bikes race anymore, because the tracks are quite different in the respect they're a lot rougher, and there's a lot of clay on the tracks. And so I really admire sprint car racing, and I've raced quite a bit myself, and also own cars and had people race for me, and so yeah, and it's obviously a big sport in the US, and I've been there to watch it a little bit, and yeah, I kind of enjoy that.
Did you have much success doing that? Or?
Well, I won a number of races. I was a state champion in WA, and I think that was back in the early '90s, and so yeah, I've had a bit of success doing it, and I've crashed a lot doing it. And I've had a bit of success with people driving for me. I had a guy called Kerry Madsen drove my car for a while, and we won a lot of big races, some of the biggest races in Australia, with him driving the car. So yeah, I really enjoy it.
I have seen some of that, and it looks really fun as well.
It is.
Very. Okay, what was your one of your favourite tracks? Firstly, as a youth rider, what was your favourite track? So probably obviously in Australia, and then during your adult career as well.
Yeah, I think in Australia, on the East Coast, particularly up in Queensland, there's some pretty good tracks, like Toowoomba is a really cool track, really sort of mountainous and sort of natural terrain, something that we didn't really have a lot of in Western Australia, but probably in Western Australia, Manjimups, where they had the MX of Nations, that's a really awesome track. There's really no track like it in Australia. It's super fast. It's got sand. It's got sort of hard packed sections. It's got some hills, and I think that's a really cool track, and it's a beautiful part of the southwest of WA. So I think probably those two tracks are some of my favourites.
What about in America? Did you ever?
America, I always enjoyed Southwick because it's a sandy track and pretty rough. So I really enjoyed Southwick. Probably was one of the ones that was pretty cool.
In Europe?
Europe, gosh, I always seem to perform pretty well on the French track. So Breu was always a good track to me. Valkenswaard I liked. Again, there's a bit of sand there. So they're probably two of the tracks in Europe that I like quite a bit. San Marino was also another one. It's a super hard track, hard packed track in a really unique location. And again, I just like riding on that surface. It was pretty technical, undulating, some good off cambers, but very hard packed, and you sort of had to have a certain type of style to sort of ride on that track.
Very cool. Okay, cool. What has been your most memorable race or meeting, and why does it still stick in the memory even today?
Oh gosh. Yeah, I think one of the ones that does stand out quite a lot is the first time I raced in the US, because I was only 14. I was over there with an English friend, as I said, and we actually borrowed Jeff Ward's bike and his gear. His dad said we could borrow it because he was switching teams, and so we loaded up Jeff Ward's bike and his gear because he was switching teams, and we drove up to Northern California and we were late getting to the track. I told my friend, we had to get there early. He was a pretty laid back guy, and we got there. Practice had already finished, and it was a Golden State Series race. And then they let me go out behind some of the race to kind of get a few laps in. And then I started up in the first moto. It was an intermediate 1-5 moto, and I think I nearly whole shot the race. And it was my first race in America. And I think I still finished third or fourth in that race. But it was just sort of being in such a different environment with the nerves and getting to the track late, and just trying to tie all that together in another part of the world. It always stands out in my mind as kind of I don't know, just a really unique experience. Where you really feel,
that's amazing.
Yeah, you really feel nervous and you're on edge and whatever, and so you're not sure what to expect. So for me, that's kind of one that I don't know, just seems to replay in my head a little bit. Obviously things like when I won my first Grand Prix event up at Ruskasanta in Finland in 89. First Australian to win a Grand Prix motocross event. That obviously is an absolute highlight moment for me.
Very cool. Okay, who are your closest friends in and around motocross? rider-wise, and how easy is it to block out that friendship once the gate drops?
Yeah, look, I suppose I was never really super close to lots of riders. I had a friend from Perth, a guy called Dale Britton, who was a good level national racer. He was probably one of my closest friends at race, and we'd train a lot together. He'd come across the US and we'd do a lot of training, but we probably weren't really competing against each other a great deal on the track. So, there were some riders there were some friendships with, but never super close. I know in the US, Ricky Johnson was pretty good, and Europe, Eric Gabor. We sort of had a reasonably good relationship. So, look, I think when you pull the helmet on and you get on the start line, there's respect, absolutely, but at the same time, you've got to do what you've got to do to get the job done, and so. But there's absolutely racers out there that are hard racers, absolutely the fiercest competitors, but they can do it in a way that I think is upstanding and clean and fair and whatever. And so I don't think you really, as a racer, even though it's cutthroat out there, I still don't think you actually absolutely have to take each other out. You can, if you're a good racer, you can do it fairly and cleanly.
You finished runner-up in the Motocross GP World Championship. What do you feel in hindsight could you have done to win it?
Yeah, look, I think there's if you haven't if you didn't make it to the top step, there's always something better you can do, and I think it's motocross is a tough sport, and it doesn't matter what you do in life. You have to really commit yourself to what you're doing. It's plain and simple. It's all about your training, preparation, and commitment, and really probably just doing either more of it or doing it better. Was probably what I needed to do. So that's plain and simple.
Okay, fair enough. Do you have any regrets in your career? Do you wish it was a certain team that you didn't ride for, you didn't enjoy, or anything like that, or?
Not so much with teams, but I think you look back and you feel like, well, and I think anyone could do this. Did you give it 100%? Did you do it in the right way? And I think you can always look back on that and self-critique and go, yeah, I could have done that better. And I think that's a process that you always go through, whether it's racing or business or whatever it might be in life, or even your personal relationships. So absolutely, there's some regrets, but look, nothing that I've got anxiety about or keeps me up at night. But it's certainly something that I've used in my business career to say, look, I think I left something there on the table in my racing career, and when I moved across to the business side with KTM, I refocused and kind of learned from maybe some of those things where I came up a bit short, and committed myself to what I had to do a little bit stronger.
Fair enough. Learned from that. Can you tell us a funny story from your racing day memories?
Yeah, I can. One of these stories was when I was still based racing in Australia, but I'd go across to Southern California to race the Golden State Series every year, and that was always early in the year, January, probably through February. And there was always all the good riders would race in the Golden State for preseason preparation, and so it was really a good opportunity to kind of get and mix it up a little bit with the US riders, and hopefully come back to Australia at a better level than everyone else. And this particular year, I went up to this race in Northern California with a friend, and obviously you're doing it on the cheap. I had a bike, and he had a pickup truck, and we threw the bike in the pickup, and it was just a funny weekend. We got to the hotel, and we thought, shit, we can't leave the bike and the pickup truck overnight. So we got the bike out and put it in the hotel, wedged it in the hotel lift because it was a multi-story hotel, and took it up into the room. And then in the morning, shit, we got to get the bike out, so we got to put the bike in the lift again. It's up at a 45-degree angle in the lift, get it down, throw it in the pickup. And then we're like, we'll get some breakfast on the way to the track. So we're going to get some breakfast, and my friend was driving, and he was a pretty crazy guy, and he said, should I do it? He asked me, should I do a handbrake turn into the Denny's restaurant? And before I could say, look, I don't think it's a good idea, because I've got my bike in the back, and the pickup might be a bit top heavy. He had the handbrake on, and he misjudged it and hit the curb going into the Denny's, and we rolled the pickup going into the Denny's car park, and so we just slid in there on the side, bike out on the road, all my tool, my gear bag. Cops came, we made some story up, we piled it all back in, handlebars are bent, went in, had breakfast, everyone's staring at us, and got out the track, and I'm hammering my handlebars straight, and went and raced, and actually had a pretty damn good day. I think I finished on the podium. So yeah, that was a funny one. Just things like that happening where it's pretty wild and crazy. So that was
very crazy.
One of the many.
Yeah. I normally ask a lot of the guys this. I'm not sure if you did or not, but my home track in the UK is actually Fox Hill. I'm not sure if you raced it. Did you race Fox Hill?
Actually, does it have another name? Is it Fox Hill Newbury? No, not Newbury. No. No, never did it. I don't think.
All the very steep, very very steep up and down hills.
No, I don't think so. I don't believe I did. No.
Okay. Was it Hawkstone? What tracks did you race in the UK?
Yeah, I did race at Hawkstone. Raced my first actual Grand Prix at Newbury. I raced the ill-fated Supercross at Chelsea Stadium many years ago.
Oh, right.
Yep. Trying to think where else we raced in the UK. I didn't really, strangely, spend a lot of time in the UK. Wish I had it, to be honest.
Yeah. How did you always get on well with Hawkstone? It was quite sandy.
Not too bad. Yeah, it was an okay track for me. So yeah, I didn't mind it. Yeah.
Okay, cool. Right, on to my next one. I had a chap come up on our Facebook group, and he actually asked me to ask you this. His name was Daniel Woodman. He said, Lee, can you ask Jeff Leisk if he's got any good stories about hanging out with Jeff Glass in LA? And he's put, that's not Los Angeles, but the glamorous lower, is it Altoona, Pennsylvania?
Yeah, Jeff Glass. He was sponsored by Surf Laundry Detergent. So he was a real character. I can't really come up with a story, to be honest. But he was absolutely a character and larger than life guy. So yeah, he was. Yeah, I don't know if it was always a positive influence on my racing, but he was always fun to hang out with. Yeah, absolutely.
Because he's put I was a mechanic for Glassy after Jeff had left the US, but he left a helmet there, and Glassy was a nutter who always had some good stories.
Oh, absolutely, yeah. No, he was, yeah, definitely.
Bit crazy there. Very crazy. Okay, you worked for KTM for a long time. Did you enjoy that role over the years, and what did that involve you doing yourself personally and everything? Yeah,
I had an involvement with KTM for just over 25 years, actually, in Australia. Yeah. So that involvement started back in 1994. And really, initially, it was just to endorse the brand. It was a new distributor or importer had taken over. And really, initially, it was just product endorsement and doing a little bit of racing on 4-strokes in Australia. Yeah. And eventually that evolved into developing a racing team for them. And and we kind of expanded on that and then moved the team to the East Coast. And I moved from the West Coast to East Coast with that. And in that process, I actually became a shareholder of the distribution and it kind of just evolved. I think after 4 or 5 years of sort of running the race team or owning the race team, I moved across into the sales and management side of the business, and then kind of just it evolved from there. And really, I think I took on the general manager status position in 2000 and basically, ran with it right through till March this year, where I've decided to step away and take a break. So, but it was an amazing journey. You know, as everyone knows, KTM's probably one of the few brands that's really grown incredibly in the motorcycle industry. In the last sort of 50 years, really. It's been a wild ride with KTM, and really here in Australia, in the Australian New Zealand market, going from around 400 units a year to 14,000. We really managed to grow the business with the brand, and or brands, because we had Husaberg and Husqvarna in the mix, and obviously now to Gas. So yeah, amazing journey, and had a great time, with KTM.
Was there a specific reason for stepping back from that, or was it just literally to give yourself a break?
I think to have a break. The corporate world, the business world is intense, and look, I was hard at it for
a long time,
well over 20 years, and so it's time to do something a little bit different. I've always been a person, I want to be completely one dimensional as an individual, and I think it's good to test and challenge yourself with some different things, and so it's really that time now to go and do that, and also with my family, I've got 2 boys back in Perth. They're kind of grown up, but I've got 2 daughters here. Still, my oldest daughter's 13 and my younger one's 11, and still I want to sort of experience some of their growing up before they're sort of gone and out of the house. So yeah, there's some other things on my agenda that I want to do, and my bucket list. So I'm trying to get into sailing right now, sort of learning how to do that, and a couple other things, and so yeah, I've got a few things I want to do.
That's cool. What do you personally feel was your best achievements in your career, and why?
Oh, look, I think one of the, I think a couple of them are, being probably one of the first Australian riders, particularly in the US, to really kind of get on the map there in the US and race the Supercross and stand on the podiums in the US. I think being the first Australian rider to do that was pretty cool. I think also then obviously winning the first Aussie to win a Grand Prix. So I think just some of those things where and I guess back in those days you had to when I first went to the US. I didn't, other than my package was really, I had some bikes and some parts. I had a parts budget and I had some bikes. I didn't have any monetary budget from Honda. It was basically, I left a full factory paid ride in Australia to go to the US, because back then no one sort of had any understanding of the talent of Australian riders. We were largely unknown, and so no one was really going to give you a factory ride the first year in the US. So really I funded that myself. I went backwards, funded it, and hired my own mechanic. And I look back and I didn't even have a budget or anything. I just, the prize money was pretty good back then. And it was really like just self-belief that each and every weekend you're going to get a result and get enough money to get to the next race. And so I just think doing things like that, where you really had to challenge yourself and have a lot of faith and belief in your own abilities, and obviously bring some people along with you, for the ride, is always important, because you can't do this on your own. So, but yeah, I think things like that are probably some of the things that I'm most proud of, and then obviously in my career, when I sort of moved on from a racing career, is helping others, helping other young racers. Yeah. With their careers and giving them opportunities, because when I look back on my racing, people gave me opportunities, particularly when you're not proven, or you're a risk, and people support you and help you, and I suppose when I had the opportunity with KTM in my management role, that was really fulfilling to help a lot of young racers and give them the support and the opportunities, whether it be in Australia or overseas. So there's some of the things that I feel good about.
Yeah, that's very cool. Were there any race teams that you particularly really enjoyed being a part of?
Look, back in Australia, with Honda, we had a really good race team with Gary Ben, who was heading up the team, and then sort of chief mechanic. So just a good environment, I think, where there was a good atmosphere, and we're pretty dominant at the time. We won a lot of races. It was pretty rare to actually lose a moto or something. So we really had it going on. I think the fact that I bought Gary Gary onto the team. He'd had a lot of experience in Europe, where really there were no mechanics at the time in Australia that had experienced Grand Prix motocross, and to identify somebody and bring them into the team, and then really have the success that we had, felt really good, because that made me realise from a fairly early age that you can't do it on your own, and you need talented and good people working on your bike. Can also really be advantageous. So that was a cool situation there. That was probably one of the better ones, I think. And I rode for some good teams over the years, and the team atmosphere is obviously always interesting. It always has different dynamics depending on the riders that are in the team and the mechanics and whatever. So you quickly realise when you're on the other end of it. When I was running race teams, just how difficult it is to create a good environment and have the right harmony there in a team where everyone feels like they want to push hard and perform, because in a high pressure environment like racing, where there's a lot of egos and all sorts of personality dynamics going on, it's never easy.
No, for sure. Were there any riders that you seem to sort of have run-ins with over the years, or any particular riders that you didn't enjoy racing with too much?
I never had too many problems, but one rider I did have quite a few, sort of seemed to always tangle with on the track a lot, was Ron Lachine. We always seemed to have some pretty brutal battles on the track, and there was a lot of warfare out there. He was just sort of a guy that if you left the door open 1 inch, he was going to come straight through you. He just didn't care. So in the end, you kind of became aware of that. But it was pretty dicey at times. It was sort of lining you up from a long way back and basically aiming the bike straight at you, and so you had to have eyes in the back of your head.
Yeah, for sure. By the sounds of that. Right. Okay. Who would you consider to be the 3 best riders that you ever competed against during your career, and why?
Definitely Ricky Johnson for me was one of the strongest, because he could win anywhere. I mean, whether it be Supercross, Motocross, USA, Europe, anywhere on the planet at that time in his prime, he could perform. So for me, he was in his era, and which was my era, he was definitely one of the best. So he was very good. Other guys, Jeff Ward was super strong. I thought he was a really unique and tough competitor. I also thought Thorpe, very strong competitor and very, very determined. So he was good. Eric Gabors, again, kind of quirky at times in terms of how he raced, but again, he could put the numbers up on the board, and obviously his record speaks for itself. So they're probably some of the riders that kind of stand out for me.
Certainly a special era for those riders.
Oh, look, I think it's hard to say. I mean, it's difficult to obviously compare eras, but I think one good thing about, at least if you sort of went through the 70s, 80s, and maybe approaching the 90s, the sport was quite accessible to a lot of people, particularly with 2-stroke bikes, and the cost of racing. I mean, the cost of motorsport is always the elephant in the room. That's and you sort of got to look at a sport and figure out what does success look like. And for me, participation, at least for me, is always the greatest mark of success in any sporting activity. And the levels of participation through the 80s and the 70s, 80s, and into the 90s was very high. I mean, I remember going to my first Supercross at Anaheim in California. I think this was about 84, maybe. There were qualifiers to get into the qualifiers, so there were 75 riders trying to qualify for 20 spots in the 250 main. I mean, that's just phenomenal. So I I think the fact that through that era, and then when the four strokes came along, unfortunately, it raised the cost of racing significantly. And I remember running the KTM race team at the time, and that transition took place. And our budget really had to increase nearly 3 times for the four strokes, and at that point in time, and really all that means is fewer people can participate in the sport, and that was for me, that was kind of sad that happened, and I think the advent of the four strokes probably is one of the worst things that happened to motocross racing in my opinion. It was a special era because of that, because the participation rates were very high, which meant it was fucking competitive, Yeah.
I don't know what it's like in Australia, but obviously in the UK now, it's like seems to be like a massive thing now to be like all retro, and everyone's going back to two strokes, having all this Evo racing. Everyone seems to be spending mega amount of money on old bikes to get them how they were and all this sort of stuff, and people seem to love all that at the minute. Is that the same over there?
It's absolutely the same, and I think it goes back to what I was just talking about. Because of the high participation rates, there's simply a lot of people out there from that era that still remember those bikes and still love those bikes, and sure, they're just still wanting to get them out there and probably relive what was a golden era, So, and look, at the end of the day, it's a lot of fun to ride motocross, to ride a motorcycle, but also at the same time, part of that fun and part of the enjoyment is the social side of it with your friends, and so getting a group of mates together and getting out there on those bikes and socialising and there's nothing better, is there really? So
that's really cool. Yeah, that's very true. Okay, the next one I've got. If you could give advice to any youngster that's currently racing in youth motocross and wants to be a pro, what would that advice be?
Yeah. Look, it's pretty much like any other sport. I think it takes a lot of dedication, a lot of commitment. So they're the things. If you want to be a professional, you have to be ready for that. That racing seems like a good way not to have a real job.
Lost you there.
But if it's done correctly, it's way harder than a regular job. So that's the thing. Don't think if you're just racing because you think it's better than a normal job, then it's going to be a free ride. Then that's probably the wrong reason to do it. But if you really love motorcycles, and I think that's one of the biggest things that I've seen over time is that some of the best